Okay, right now we're going to do a short little video on combining like terms. So first we need to make a few definitions. So variables are components or parts of a term, and so you need to make sure we understand what a variable is. Normally we use a letter. That wouldn't necessarily have to be a letter, but it's a letter that represents a number. Okay? The earliest you were introduced to variables, they weren't used as they weren't letters. So for instance, when you were first learning about arithmetic, how to add and subtract, you might have gotten something like this. An empty box plus 3 equals 10. You had to figure out what goes in there. That's your unknown. What goes in there? It was 7. So now instead of using a box, we're going to use a letter. And that letter, if everywhere it's used in that same equation, it'll mean the same number. So this letter represents some number. What number does it represent? Well, this number plus 3 has to give you 10, so x would have to be equal to 7. Okay? In general, if we have two different letters, two different variables, they would be two different numbers. However, sometimes the two variables can actually equal the same thing, but you want to think of them as different, at least for now. Okay, a term is a single number. Or a single variable. So a single number would be 6, for instance, or 16. That's a term. A single variable, like y, that's also a term. And if we take a product of numbers, so if we multiply them together, so 6 times 4, well, that would be 24. Okay, so if we look at it like this or like this, either one would be a term, right? Normally you wouldn't have to worry too much about that. It's just a single number. If we take a number and a variable and multiply it together, that's a term. Okay? And if we take more than one variable, so an x and a y, it's a term. And I'm running out of room, so I'll do it over here. It really doesn't matter how many you string together and multiply. We have 8 times x times y times z, still a term. Okay? Where it's not a term, or not a single term, is something like this. If we're adding 6 plus x, this is two terms, right? So this is an expression with two terms. That's a term. That's a term. Now the question we're going to address is when you can take two terms or three terms and put them together and simplify it into one term. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. What it depends on, so it depends upon the variables, okay? If the variable part is exactly the same, then you can, what that means is that you can add or subtract. Okay, so that's when they're like terms. So like terms would be x and 3x. Okay, this has a 3 in front of the variable. That's called the coefficient. And this has, well, there's a 1. There's an invisible 1 there. And that's its coefficient. But the variable part is exactly the same. Now, like terms would be x and 3y. Okay, the difference is here we can say x plus 3x and there's 1x here, 3x's here. The rule is we add or subtract depending on what this symbol is right here and the signs in front. So we have a positive 1, positive 3. We add these and we end up with 4x's. This one, x plus 3y, the variables are not the same, so we can do nothing. So we have to leave it the way it is. Okay? So, next one, x squared. Let's make that a 2. And 5x squared. Here, 2x squared, 5x. So you may look at this and think the variables are the same, but they aren't quite the same because this exponent changes this. The variable portion is this part right here, and this x to the second power is not quite the same as x. So we're not allowed to combine those. So 2x squared plus 5x equals 2x squared plus 5x. Over here, on the other hand, 2x squared plus 5x squared, variable part is the same. So we add the coefficients and we end up with, oops, my mistake, 5 plus 2 is 7x squared. Now notice here, when we combine and add the coefficients, the variable stays exactly the same. The exponent does not change. When we add here, same thing. Coefficients, we combine these, 2 plus 5, 7, x squared stays the same. I'll do another example. Okay, like terms, variables are exactly the same. Variables are not exactly the same. Okay, so you cannot simplify. So simplifying is just a term we use to when we combine the terms and make it simpler by reducing the number of terms. In this case, variable terms are exactly the same, so we subtract. 8 minus 14 is negative 6. Variable portion stays exactly the same. And that's how you combine like terms.